This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. Hey, what's up and welcome to Hot Takes. I'm excited to do this one because there were a lot of interesting comments, especially on the stadium video that I really took a lot of time to look into. And I think you're going to see in this video once we get to those comments, but a lot of comments to be talking about. I think it's going to be a fun show. Let's do it. Myles Garrett, did he live up to all the hype, or Myles Garrett lived up to all the hype? Doc Main says, Ed Reed is more a Raven than Ray Lewis. I know you were talking about sacks and such, but the better defensive player, in my opinion. That's not what I was talking about at all. What I'm talking about when I say that Ray Lewis was like the face of the Ravens, it's not a declaration on who you think was the best player on the Ravens. It's a declaration of who was the most popular and the most associated player with the Baltimore Ravens. And while Ed Reed is certainly high up there, Ray Lewis is who you associate with the Ravens. Every time Ray Lewis literally does that dance, every time there's a big Raven game, because that's literally like the biggest part of the ethos in the history of the Baltimore Ravens is the story of Ray Lewis. Ed Reed is a big name and all of that, and Ed Reed is cool, and I like Ed Reed, and I think it's a fair opinion to say that Ed Reed was a better defensive player than Ray Lewis. I don't know if it's definitive or not, but what is definitive is that Ray Lewis is one of the most popular, if not the most popular players to ever play football, and certainly the most popular Raven. Like the same way when you think of the Cavs, you think of LeBron James, Mariano Rivera, when you think of the Yankees or any other player that you associate heavily with that logo, Tom Brady and the Patriots, is the same way you do it with Ray Lewis in Baltimore. That was more my point. It wasn't really a question of who is the better player. The next comment comes from Jay Leach, who says, love the videos. I usually watch but don't comment. I agree with Myles being number one. I only have one critique of this video. Nick Chubb absolutely has a chance, in my opinion, to be better than the great Jim Brown. Okay. We'll continue. Time will be kind to Nick Chubb's works. I've heard comparisons of him and Jim Brown's running style. If he comes off the injury and does 2 more Nick Chubb-like years, I think he has an argument. Once again, love the content. Hey, man, if you watch this channel, first off, you know that I am as big of an advocate for Nick Chubb and a fan of Nick Chubb as anybody out here. I constantly talk about his value that he brings to the game. I am not somebody who is going to come close to underestimating what it is that Nick Chubb does. I pay attention to what he does. I know what his value is. And because I know what his value is, I think you're doing him a disservice by comparing him to Jim Brown. He is not Jim Brown. Nobody is Jim Brown. Think about it like this. Derrick Henry and Adrian Peterson, who are shoe-in Hall of Famers, right? Nick Chubb, there's an argument there for him, but he's not a shoe-in Hall of Famer. Derrick Henry and Adrian Peterson, no doubt first ballot Hall of Famers. They aren't Jim Brown, and they ain't even close to Jim Brown. Jim Brown was a 3-time NFL MVP, a 8-time first-team All-Pro football player, somebody who I think he had the rushing title 8 times, and you can argue, oh, he did it in a different era and all of that, and who would Jim Brown be, and you could try to do the cross-generational argument, but just if we're looking at it like this, what Jim Brown was for his generation and what Nick Chubb is for his generation, it ain't even close. It's no disrespect to Jim Brown. Not Jim Brown, to Nick Chubb. But y'all got to stop this shit with comparing him to Jim Brown. Jim Brown is one of the greatest football players ever. He was considered the greatest football player ever before Tom Brady took that crown. That is Jim Brown. Nick Chubb, not Jim Brown. Not even a slight to not be Jim Brown. Again, you will find nobody who has a better ideal of the value that Nick Chubb brings to the table than me. I constantly argue for that. But you're being ridiculous if you think he's close to Jim Brown. Jim Brown, greatest running back of all time, one of the greatest football players ever, and you can make the argument, damn it, that he's the greatest non-quarterback to ever play. That is Jim Brown. Jim Brown carried multiple teams to championships. And he did all of that in a 10-year career where I believe he was retired by the time that he was the same age as Nick Chubb. Also achieved all of his numbers in a 12-game regular season. We're not about to do that to Jim Brown. That's crazy. We're not about to do that to Jim Brown. I understand the enthusiasm and you want to love Nick Chubb and show your appreciation, but you really don't do Nick Chubb any justice by trying to compare him to Jim Brown. Like, this isn't something you do if you love the Browns, period. This isn't something you do if you love Jim Brown, or this isn't something you do if you love Nick Chubb. This is just unfair to everybody involved once you really think about it. I don't think this was somebody being like disingenuous or anything. Let me be clear on that. But I do think this is when you can be a little bit over enthusiastic and be unaware of the fact that you're doing things that are harmful to the players that you like. And Nick Chubb, comparing him to Jim Brown, that's ridiculous. Don't do that. Don't force people to tell you how Nick Chubb is not Jim Brown. That's not a conversation Nick Chubb deserves to be in. And that's no disrespect. That's just telling you how good Jim Brown was. We cannot not minimize the impact. Jim Brown was something else, man. All right. We got to chill on that. Absolutely 1000% got to chill on that. Again, Nick Chubb, great. Love Nick Chubb. You'll find multiple videos on this channel of me telling people who devalue what Nick Chubb brings to the table to shut up. But I draw the line at comparing him to Jim Brown. That's no. You can say his running style reminds you of Jim Brown. And I think that's something you did hit in that comment. But once you start talking about he can be the same thing as Jim Brown, then you got to stop you right there. Stop that. I think you mean well. I do. But you got to stop. That is wild. Wild. It's wild to say that about Adrian Peterson. Okay. It's wild to say that about LaDainian Tomlinson. Like, name one of the greatest running backs you ever seen in your life. It's wild to say that about. Cannot do it. Absolutely cannot do it. All right. Next one is from the prices. The wide receivers are too damn high. Gagan S says this: I disagree with no salary cap. Would make the NFL a worse product. It's fun for if you're the Yankees or Dodger fans, or even a Power 5 college football fan, but fans deserve a good product. What really helps is that players, if all deals were fully guaranteed with a few conditions. See, ownership propaganda has really sunk its teeth into a lot of conversations. And this is in reaction to a comment that I made. I just wish that we didn't have salary caps in a sport like football, because I just don't want to spend this much time talking about if somebody's contract is worth it. I'd rather just talk about the ball. And I stand by that. And honestly, I think this fear of no salary cap is unfounded, because the example you bring up is in baseball, right? The Yankees and the Dodgers spend money, but other teams don't. The difference between football and baseball, I think, is inherently obvious. Football is immensely more popular than baseball. The difference between being the Yankees and being, what's one of the least profitable teams in MLB? Like the Twins, okay? Let's say the Chicago White Sox. They're in a big market, though. Let's say Minnesota Twins, right? Like a small market, classic small market team. The difference between being those two teams is pretty stark, because baseball is not popular enough to where if you're at the bottom of the total poll, you're going to be making a ton of bank. You're still going to be making a lot of money compared to me and you, but it's not going to be the type of money that you can make in the NFL. The NFL, on the other hand, all 32 teams make the same amount of money, right? This is a cartel, right? Where all 32 partners make the same exact. The Cowboys make the same money as the Cincinnati Bengals. And honestly, even in baseball, a lot of it isn't because ownership can't spend money. It's that they don't want to spend money. That has nothing to do with the salary cap. Now, you do need minimums in place. You do need to enforce that teams play with a certain amount of salary on deck, because that does become an issue in baseball where teams try to just be as cheap as possible, right? But I feel like if you want to go and sign and keep your players and spend as much money as possible, you should be free to do that. And the only reason I want to do that is selfish. I'm tired of talking about contracts. It's the most boring, reductive thing I have to do here is argue with people about contracts of money that I don't care about, see, or benefit from. I don't like talking about other people's money. I don't like sounding like I'm hating on somebody's paycheck because I got to analyze how much their money affects the cap. Like, I don't like doing none of that shit. I want to talk about football. And if there's no salary cap, and there's restrictions on how low you can go, and teams are generally allowed to do what they want to as far as going over or whatever, I'm fine with it. I'm absolutely fine with it. Maybe we could say it doesn't have to be a hard cap. It could be a soft cap. I don't care if a team wants to spend way more money. And honestly, to make this argument where you're saying, hey, it's not fair if a team gets to spend more money than a team that doesn't, dog, you root for the Cleveland Browns. This is a bad argument for you to have if you're a Browns fan, because what's happening right now with the Browns is that they're spending so much more money than almost every other team in the NFL, other than like the Philadelphia Eagles. Like, that's the Browns' advantage right now, is that they're willing to spend the money. Like, in this scenario, the Browns are the Yankees. And again, can't compare football to baseball when it comes to who's going to make money. It's not really about market size in the NFL because, again, NFL revenue is split up 32 ways. I don't know if that's how they do baseball, but baseball is just not as popular as football anymore. So it's just a different beast. The money's probably going to be high for every team. Every team's probably going to spend a lot of money to want to compete. And unless I got to worry about how much somebody makes because they're in the salary cap sport, the better it is for me to be talking about other shit. The next video is Brandon Aiyuk trade rumors. We had to talk about that. Kickflip says paying JOK should be a way bigger priority, in my opinion. I don't think those two should be positioned as mutually exclusive. I think you could trade for Aiyuk and get JOK. So I don't think you have to position them against each other. But the JOK extension isn't going to happen till the season because the Browns' position on that is they want to wait and see what JOK is going to do in this new expanded role before they pay him. So I don't think this has, like, trading for Brandon Aiyuk wasn't going to affect JOK's extension either way. That extension isn't going to come till mid-season if it's going to come, you know? So I don't think that those two should be linked. Sam Fischer says, I understand AB's point of view. Building a receiving core of Njoku, Judy, Aiyuk for the next 4 to 5 years is appealing. Spending a first-round pick on a wide receiver could be a star when we need a left tackle this offseason. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways you can flip it. I mean, if you really don't think Jed Wills is that bad, then you can run it back with Jed at like $15 million a year. You just want to get off paying the offensive line. I'm not sure how the Browns see it, but there's appeal to Aiyuk, and obviously with any move, there's going to be positives and negatives of it. And I think that they have to weigh that out and see what's the number that would stop them from going after somebody like Aiyuk financially. All right, the next question is, comment is from, I've never been more split on a potential Browns move. This is one of the rare times where Browns fans can see the value in a trade, but also, you know, be fine if the trade doesn't get done because the team is not in a dire position where they're going to get destroyed if they don't make this move, right? The Browns are in a pretty good spot. They can walk away from a deal, and that means that they're not going to reach just to add a player. All right, this is from the stadium reveal video. Got a lot of interesting comments here. First one is, with all that natural light, though, they may be able to grow natural grass indoors since it's basically a greenhouse. I got another comment on this video about, hey, with all of that see-through glass on the top of the dome, isn't that going to make it a greenhouse because of the greenhouse effect, right? Where it's going to make the heat hotter because it traps all the heat in, all of that stuff. So here's how the glass roofs usually work, right? Whenever you see a translucent roof, I know SoFi has one. I know Allegiant Stadium has one, and the Minnesota Vikings Stadium has one, US Bank. So what that is actually not glass. That's plastic. That's called an ETFE foil. It's about 10% translucent, which means it lets about 8 to 10% of sunlight in. It looks like it's completely see-through because one, sun is super bright, especially in the middle of the day. And two, you're not really that close to it, so you don't notice that it's not completely translucent. But it's not completely translucent. That's usually how this is done. So that means two things. One, if you're worried about the greenhouse effect, it does not have that problem because it's only letting 8 to 10% of that sunlight actually in. So it's not that hot. It's not actual glass that they're using. It's a super space age plastic kind of thingy that they're doing on top of the roof. And two, if you're wondering if you grow natural grass indoors with that because you have the big glass roof and everything, from what I know, that means you can't because it only lets about 8 to 10% of sunlight in. And grass needs a lot more sunlight than that to grow in the summertime. And it needs especially a lot more sunlight for that to grow in the wintertime, right? When there's less sunlight available in a place like Northeast Ohio. Now, the one thing I will point out is that in the renders that they showed of the roof of the Browns' new dome stadium, and we have to be ultra careful with this because this isn't even announcing that they're going to start construction on that dome. This is them announcing what they would plan for the dome. So what we saw in that render is really just like a wish list of what they want to do. It's not necessarily what they have said is going to get built. So, that being the case, when I look at that video, I see a super clear roof. Like, that roof does not look like it's ETFE foil. That roof looks like it's glass. Now, I am not aware of any technology that would allow you to build a completely transparent roof that would avoid making the dome over like 150 degrees on a 90-degree day in direct sunlight. I am not aware of any technology that exists that could do that. I'm not an expert in this field. Maybe there has been advancements to ETFE foil that makes it much, 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 much more translucent than it is right now. But if this is going to get built, how these have been built, that's going to be ETFE foil, which means you can't grow natural grass inside there, which means unless they're willing to resod every week and put natural grass manually in that stadium's definitely going to have turf. I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. I know there's a lot of anti-turf stuff out there, but all in all, playing turf, it's just slightly worse than natural grass. Would it be better if they could have natural grass? Obviously, of course, but I haven't seen any like good ways to grow natural grass indoors other than sliding the grass in and out. And it doesn't look like that dome has that mechanism. And even if they did have that mechanism, it would still be very hard to maintain because those mechanisms were built for areas where they get a lot of sunlight all year round, right? Arizona has one and Las Vegas has one. I don't know if mechanisms like that are good for somewhere like Northeast Ohio, where there's less sunlight in the wintertime, and there's more rain and conditions in general, right? Like, are you going to be able to pull the grass out and slide it out in the wintertime when there's snow out there? Would that even make sense? Would it help the grass grow? Are you going to be able to even have a mechanism like that here? It hasn't been done before. So there's just, I don't think it's really feasible to build a dome and then also have it be natural grass. So I think it's just a sacrifice you have to take in order to have a dome, because the current technology just doesn't exist unless they made some kind of massive leap in ETFE foil where they're able to let the proper amount of sunlight in, or they're willing to invest like a bunch of money on a very impractical grow light system underneath the stadium just for that. It doesn't make sense on a practical level. It doesn't make sense for what they propose with the budget. And this is a stadium that they've already marketed to us as multi-purpose for basketball, concerts, all of these other things. And if they're marketing it for that, I mean, I'm just telling you, it's most realistically going to be turf that's going to be on the field, which I understand a lot of people aren't a fan of, but if you want a dome, that's just part of what's going to have to come with it until we get better technology. I know people cite that the Premier League has a stadium that can grow grass underground, but even that system hasn't been tested out. It's something that's going to start next year. It's not really a real technology yet. So that's just what the reality is of natural grass indoors. It's very hard to do. It's hard to do even if you had a what would you call it? A retractable dome, right? Because even the retractable dome stadiums can't grow grass inside because the shadows, the openings aren't big enough. It's just not something that's easy to do. And I think a lot of people think it's easy to grow like this high quality grass indoors. It's just not at an NFL level, and not to be able to maintain a field that takes a NFL level of beating on a weekly basis, while also like having other stuff be in that venue. I just don't think it's a feasible reality, to be honest with you. But that's my thoughts after looking into all of the reasons and what's actually going on with the technology there. It just doesn't make much sense once you really look into it for that to be anything but turf. I don't live in Cleveland or Ohio, so no real dog in this fight. It looks cool. Should taxpayers fund it? No. Hate the idea that they're not by the lake because of tradition. But the Cowboys aren't in Dallas either. When we finally get to Cleveland for a home game, it looks like a place I could stay for a week instead of flying in and leaving. Yeah, I mean, that's the hope, right? That you could stay, get a hotel near there. Hopefully there's some hotels that are affordable enough, or they build some hotels that are off the site. You know, that's the hope, most certainly. And I think a lot of people are going to want to come in town to just see the stadium. You know, it works for Minnesota. It should work for Cleveland too. Dan says the dog pound looks like the yellow wall from Borussia Dortmund. I'll try to put a video in, or not a video. I'm not going to get copyright struck. I'll try to put a photo in of what that looks like, but I've seen it. It looks very impressive when you see like that tall stacking of fans. But yeah, I think that's what they're going for there. It's going to be really cool if they do it. And super loud, like really, really loud, I think is another thing. All right, but that's going to be it with this hot takes video. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.